The rain fell in sheets, a grey curtain that blurred the edges of the city into a watercolor smear. Elara watched it from the leather armchair, each drop that struck the windowpane a tiny echo of the thrumming in her own veins. Exhaustion was a familiar cloak, heavy and threadbare, but today it felt different. Sharper. It had woven itself into her bones, a deep, cellular fatigue that no amount of sleep could touch. 26 years old, and she felt ancient. This was her last stop. Dr. Alistair Caelan. The name itself felt archaic, pulled from a dusty history book. He was a specialist in esoteric internal medicine, a title so vague it sounded like quackery. But after a dozen other doctors had shrugged, offering diagnoses from chronic fatigue to fibromyalgia to "it's all in your head," desperation had become her primary motivator. Her friend Maya had found him, an obscure referral from a friend of a friend who swore the man worked miracles. Elara just wanted answers. She wanted one morning where waking up didn't feel like surfacing from a deep, crushing sea. The waiting room was not a room at all, but a study. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves groaned with leather-bound volumes, their gilded spines gleaming in the low light of a green-shaded lamp. The air smelled of old paper, ozone, and something else, something clean and wild, like a forest after a storm. There was no receptionist, no hum of computers, only the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, and the relentless drumming of the rain. It was unsettlingly quiet. She felt exposed, her ragged pulse a frantic counterpoint to the clock's steady rhythm. The door to the inner office opened without a sound. He stood there, a silhouette against the light within. He was taller than she'd expected, dressed not in a white coat, but in a dark, tailored suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. As he stepped forward, the lamplight caught his features. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and dark hair that fell over his brow with a kind of studied carelessness. But it was his eyes that held her. They were the color of storm clouds, a deep, turbulent gray, and they were fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. He didn't blink. Not once. "Miss Hayes," he said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth and resonant, yet it vibrated with an undercurrent of something that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. Power. Old, deep power. "Please, come in." She rose on shaky legs, her worn satchel clutched in her hand like a shield. The fatigue was a physical weight now, pressing down on her shoulders. Every step toward him felt like wading through molasses. He simply watched her, his gaze unwavering, as if he were cataloguing every tremor, every hitch in her breath. He didn't offer a hand, just stepped back to allow her entry. The air in his office was even more charged, thick with the same wild scent. The rain seemed to intensify, lashing against the massive bay window behind his mahogany desk. She sat in the chair he indicated, the leather cool against her skin, and felt ridiculously small, a specimen under a microscope. He took his seat opposite her, the great desk a chasm between them, and folded his hands. And still, he did not blink. His stillness was absolute, predatory. It was the stillness of a mountain, of a creature that measures time in epochs, not seconds. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. This was a mistake. This was a terrible mistake. He held her medical file, a thick manila folder she'd had forwarded, but he didn't open it. He didn't need to. His grey eyes scanned her, and she had the unnerving sensation that he was reading her very cells, deciphering the scrambled code of her DNA. "The fatigue began 18 months ago," he stated, not asked. "The fevers are intermittent, highest at night. You experience sharp, migratory joint pain, and a sensitivity to light that has been worsening." Elara swallowed, her throat dry. "It's all in my file." "Files are paper and ink," he replied, his voice soft but carrying an immense weight. "They catalogue symptoms. I am interested in the source." He leaned forward slightly, the movement economical and precise. "They tested you for lupus, for Lyme, for rheumatoid arthritis. They found nothing definitive. Elevated inflammatory markers, anomalous white blood cell counts. They prescribed steroids, which helped for a time, then failed. Then immunosuppressants. They made you worse. Each word was a clinical, accurate strike. He knew every dead end she'd been down, every failed treatment that had chipped away at her hope. How? I read your file, Miss Hayes, he said, though his gaze suggested a far deeper reading. Tell me about the dreams. The question landed like a stone in the silent room. Her breath caught. She hadn't told anyone about the dreams, not even Maya. They were too strange, too vivid. She dismissed them as fever-addled fantasies. I don't see what that has to do with anything. Humor me, his gaze was relentless. It wasn't unkind, but it was unyielding. There was no escaping it. She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers in her lap. They are fragmented. Running. There's a forest, always at night. And I'm being hunted. I can feel it, a coldness, a hunger, behind me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And sometimes, there's a light. A star. It feels like it's inside me, trying to get out, but it hurts. It burns. He nodded slowly, a single, deliberate motion. The burning coincides with your fevers again, a statement, not a question. He understood. The realization was terrifying and, in a way she couldn't explain, a profound relief. For the first time, she felt seen. Not just observed, but truly seen. I need to conduct an examination, he said, rising from his chair. He moved with a liquid grace that was utterly silent. He didn't gesture to an examination table. He simply came around the desk and knelt before her chair. The intimacy of the gesture was staggering. It sent a jolt of alarm and a confusing flutter of warmth through her. He was too close. The scent of him, ozone and ancient forests, was overwhelming. Your wrist, he commanded softly. Hesitantly, she extended her left hand. He didn't take it. Instead, his fingers, long and cool, brushed against the delicate skin of her inner wrist. A current, potent and electric, shot up her arm, making her gasp. It wasn't a static shock, it was alive. It felt like recognition. His thumb traced a small, faint grouping of freckles there, a constellation so pale she often forgot it existed. Under his touch, the skin tingled, then burned with a gentle, pulsing heat. A birthmark, he murmured, his gaze fixed on the spot. The mark of the pole star. His thumb stroked over it again, and the heat intensified, a soothing balm that seeped deep into her aching joints. The ever-present throb in her wrist, a souvenir from a childhood fall, vanished completely. Not dulled, but gone. She snatched her hand back, her heart pounding. What did you do? His storm-grey eyes lifted to meet hers. For the first time, a flicker of something that wasn't clinical assessment moved in their depths. It looked like sorrow. Your body is not failing, Alara. It is awakening. And it is doing so without a guide, which is tearing you apart from the inside out. He straightened up, his height seeming to fill the room, to push the very shadows into the corners. This is not a sickness. It is your heritage. Heritage. The word hung in the air between them, charged and strange. Her heritage was a muddle of Irish farmers and Scottish weavers. A thoroughly unremarkable lineage of hard-working people, who died of thoroughly unremarkable causes. There were no hidden duchesses, no family fortunes. Just people. My heritage is a predisposition to high cholesterol, and a stubborn refusal to ask for directions, she said, her voice tight, with a mixture of fear and sarcasm. It was her default defense. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a fleeting, sad expression. Further back. Your maternal line. There is a break in the records, is there not? Around the late 19th century. He was right. She'd done a genealogy project in high school and hit a wall. Her great-great-grandmother was a blank slate before she arrived in America, a woman who appeared in the records as if from thin air. How could you possibly know that? Your family name is Hayes now, but it wasn't always. It was O'Connell before your grandmother married. And before that. He watched her, his unblinking gaze seeming to pull the answer from her memory. I don't know, she stammered. The records are gone. A fire, I think. The name was Cri, he said softly, the Gaelic word rolling off his tongue like a forgotten song. Eternal. A name given to those who served the veil. It meant nothing to her. It was gibberish, the ramblings of a man who was either a charlatan or insane. She felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. Anger at her own foolish hope that this time would be different. I think I should go. No, he said, the word a soft command that rooted her to the spot. We are just getting to the source of the problem. He leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. The posture was casual, but the energy coming off him was anything but. Tell me about Lyra. Elara froze, her hand halfway to the strap of her satchel. Lyra. It was the name from the stories her grandmother used to tell, hushed and full of wonder. Lyra, her great-great-grandmother, the one with no past. The family healer. The one who died far too young. She was my ancestor. That's all. There is no that's all with a woman like her, he countered, his voice losing its clinical edge and taking on a rough, personal timbre. She was spoken of as a healer, wasn't she? A woman who could soothe fevers with a touch and knew which plants could mend a broken bone. Family folklore, Elara dismissed, though her grandmother's stories came rushing back. Tales of Lyra walking through fields of wildflowers, humming to the bees, her hands always gentle, always warm. They said she had starlight in her eyes. She died of pneumonia before she was 30. She couldn't even heal herself. She did not die of pneumonia, he said, and the certainty in his voice was absolute. It chilled her to the bone. She was murdered. The air crackled. The storm outside seemed to pause, holding its breath. That's not true. That's a horrible thing to say. Is it? Or is it a truth your family has chosen to forget? His eyes held hers, and she felt stripped bare, all her defenses useless. You carry her in your blood, in your bones. You carry her legacy. And her weakness. The accusation stung. All her life she'd been fighting this weakness, this fragile body that betrayed her. To have it thrown in her face by this stranger. She fumbled in her satchel, her fingers closing around the cool, smooth metal of the locket she always wore. It had been Lyra's. It was the only tangible piece of her that remained. This is all I know of her, she said, pulling it out. The silver was tarnished, the chain delicate. She clicked it open. On one side was a tiny, faded photograph, a sepia portrait of a young woman with wild, dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right through the camera, into the future. On the other side was a strange, swirling engraving, a star with a comet's tail. The mark of the pole star. The same pattern as her birthmark. She'd never made the connection before. Her breath hitched. She held it out to him, an offering and a challenge. This is Lyra. He didn't move for a long moment. He just stared at the open locket in her hand. The stillness that had been so unnerving before was now different. It was fragile, taut, like a string pulled to its breaking point. Slowly, as if moving through water, he reached out. His fingers, impossibly gentle, brushed against hers as he took the locket. His touch was no longer cool, it was scorching hot. He lifted it, his gaze fixed on the tiny portrait. The whole world seemed to narrow to that single point, to the space between the immortal man and the ghost in the photograph. The room grew colder. The scent of ozone was thick, electric. A deep, shuddering breath racked his frame, the first sign of any lack of control she had seen in him. His knuckles were white where he gripped the delicate silver. He stared at the image of the woman with starlight in her eyes, and the centuries of composure he wore like armor simply disintegrated. His grey eyes, those unblinking, all-seeing eyes, finally closed. A single, pained muscle ticked in his jaw. When he opened them again, they were shattered. They were a raw, open wound, swirling with a grief so profound, so ancient, it stole the air from Alara's lungs. He looked from the portrait to her face, seeing the same curve of a cheekbone, the same tilt of a chin, the same stubborn fire deep in her eyes. His voice, when he finally spoke, was not the smooth baritone of a doctor. It was the torn, ragged whisper of a man who had lost everything. Lyra, he breathed, the name a prayer and a curse. He lifted his gaze from the locket to lock with hers, and the raw agony in his eyes held her captive. My wife. The two words dropped into the silence of the room and shattered it. My wife? They didn't make sense. They were impossible, a tear in the fabric of reality. Alara's mind scrambled for purchase, for any logical explanation, and found none. This man, who looked no older than his mid-30s, was claiming to be the husband of her great-great-grandmother, a woman born in the 1870s. No, she whispered, the denial automatic, instinctual. You're lying. That's impossible. She tried to stand, to put distance between herself and this sudden, terrifying madness, but her legs wouldn't obey. She was pinned by the sheer force of his grief. Is it? Alistair's voice was hollowed out, scraped raw. He didn't look away from her, and in his gaze, she saw the reflection of a love that had defied time, a loss that had never healed. I have lived for over 500 years, Alara. I have watched empires rise and fall like the tide. The only impossibility I have ever known was a world without her in it. He finally looked down at the locket again, his thumb stroking the edge of the photograph with a reverence that made her ache. I gave this to her on our wedding day. The star is the sigil of my house. A promise of protection, his mouth twisted in a bitter, self-recriminating line. A promise I failed to keep. I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. You're insane, but even as she said it, a part of her knew it was the truth. It explained the impossible stillness, the ancient eyes, the palpable energy that hummed in the air around him. It explained how he knew about her dreams, her birthmark, her ancestry. It was a truth so vast and terrifying that her mind simply refused to accept it. She pushed herself to her feet, knocking her chair back. I'm leaving. You can't, he said, and for the first time, his voice held a desperate, pleading edge. He rose, blocking her path not with his body, but with the sheer intensity of his presence. Alara, please. Your illness, the fatigue, the fevers, it is your power awakening. The same power that flowed in Lyra's veins. It's a gift, a light. But right now, it's an untended fire, and it is consuming you. He took a step closer. And it is acting as a beacon. The thing that hunted her, that took her from me, has sensed her echo in you. It is drawn to your light. It is what you feel hunting you in your dreams. It is the reason you are sick. It is feeding on you. Fear, cold and absolute, washed over her. The dream hunter. The chilling, hungry presence that left her waking in a cold sweat. It wasn't a dream. It was real. The puzzle pieces of her life, the strange symptoms, the feeling of being watched, the oppressive exhaustion, they all slammed into place, forming a picture she didn't want to see. What are you? She whispered, her earlier fear giving way to a dreadful curiosity. My kind has many names. Guardians. Sentinels. We are other, he seemed to struggle for a word she would understand. We are tied to the ancient places of the world, and to certain bloodlines. My life is sworn to protect the CRI line. I failed Lyra. I will not fail you. The possessiveness in his tone grated on her, even as another part of her, the terrified, exhausted part, craved the safety he was offering. I don't belong to you. I'm not her. I know, he said, and the pain in his eyes deepened. I see her in you, but you are not her ghost. You are fire and will, all your own. Lyra was gentler. Like moonlight. You are the coming dawn. The unexpected poetry of his words disarmed her. He saw her, not just as a patient, not just as a descendant, but as herself. She was still trapped in the whirlwind of it all, her reality fracturing, when his head snapped toward the bay window. His entire posture shifted in an instant. The grieving man vanished, replaced by a predator. His body coiled with tension, and a low, almost inaudible growl rumbled in his chest. He's found you. Who? Elara whispered, spinning to look at the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was a bruised purple, and a thick, unnatural fog was rolling in, swallowing the street lights. A profound cold seeped through the glass, raising goosebumps on her skin. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end. It was the same cold from her dreams. The same feeling of being hunted. It was here. The world through Alistair's eyes was a tapestry of energy and intent. For centuries, he had seen the mundane reality that humans perceived, but overlaid with the shimmering currents of power, the dark stains of malice, and the bright, searing threads of life. Elara's thread had been a faint, flickering silver for years, a distant echo of the radiant gold that had been Lyra's. But in the last 18 months, it had begun to glow, to pulse with a raw, uncontrolled power that sang out into the unseen world. He had been drawn to it, a moth to a flame he had thought extinguished forever. Seeing her, sitting in his office, so fragile and yet so fiercely alive, had been like a physical blow. The grief he had meticulously buried for over a century had clawed its way to the surface. Lyra. His Lyra had been sunlight and laughter, her power a gentle, healing warmth. She had loved him with a pure, human heart, unafraid of his immortality, of his true nature. And he, in his arrogance, in his belief that his strength was absolute, had failed to see the shadow that gathered at her heels until it was too late. The shade that had taken her was a creature of envy and hunger, a parasite that fed on light, and Lyra's had been the brightest he had ever known. Now, that same shadow slithered through the foggy streets, drawn to the nascent beacon that was Elara. He felt its chilling, empty hunger. He had spent a century hunting the creature's master, the one who had sent it, but had found only dead ends. Now, the prey had come to him. But it was not him it was hunting. It was hunting the last remnant of his heart. He looked at Elara, who stood frozen, her eyes wide with a terror that was finally, horribly, real. He saw the same fire he had loved in Lyra, but it was banked, tempered by a lifetime of struggle and pain that his wife had never known. This woman was a fighter. She had been fighting her own body, her own heritage, her entire life. She was no fragile flower to be shielded. She was a sword waiting to be forged. The thought sent a jolt of something fierce and protective through him, but it was different now. It was not the need to possess, but the need to empower. He would not make the same mistake twice. He would not hide her away. He would stand with her, and teach her to wield the fire she held inside. His love for Lyra was a sacred, aching memory. What he felt for Elara was something new, something sharp and immediate and terrifyingly potent. It was a second chance, not to replace what was lost, but to honor it by protecting its legacy. And he would tear the world apart to see it done. Back in the room, the cold intensified. A fine layer of frost spread across the window pane in intricate, fern-like patterns. The steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock faltered, then stopped. The silence was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. "What is that?" Elara's voice was barely a breath of sound. "A shade," Alistair said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He moved to stand between her and the window, his body a solid, unyielding shield. A soul eater. It's a creature of shadow and hunger. It can't take a life, not directly, but it can drain it. It can feed on your energy, your light, until there's nothing left but a hollow shell. It is what has been making you sick, feeding on you in your sleep, weakening you. The description was horrifyingly apartment. That was exactly how she felt, hollowed out, drained. As if something was slowly, methodically drinking her dry. You have to get out of here, he said, his focus entirely on the threat outside. And go where? It knows where I live. The panic she'd been holding at bay finally broke through, raw and sharp. It's been in my home, in my dreams. He turned to her then, and the raw power rolling off him was staggering. It was a physical pressure in the room, making the air thick and hard to breathe. His grey eyes were no longer the eyes of a man, but of something far older and more dangerous. They swirled with silver light. It will never touch you again. I swear it on my life. He offered her proof without her asking for it. He reached out, not to touch her, but to the dying ficus plant in the corner of the room, a plant she hadn't even noticed before. Its leaves were brown and curled, its branches brittle. He held his hand over it, and a soft, golden light bloomed from his palm. Elara watched, mesmerized, as life flowed back into the plant. The brown leaves greened, the branches straightened, and a single, perfect white blossom unfurled at its very top. The healing was instantaneous, miraculous, and utterly undeniable. This was real. All of it. A loud scratching sound came from the window, the sound of claws on glass, and she flinched, a scream catching in her throat. The frost on the pane thickened, growing opaque. A shadowy, humanoid shape became visible through the ice, its form indistinct and wavering, its presence a vortex of absolute cold. It cannot enter a warded space, Ancestor said, his voice calm despite the terrifying display. My office is shielded. But the wards will not hold forever against a direct assault. It knows you are here. It is testing the boundaries. The building gave a low groan, a deep, structural shudder, as if under immense pressure. The books on the shelves rattled. A hairline crack appeared in the window pane, spreading like a spider web. What do we do? Elara asked, her voice shaking. Ancestor looked at her, his expression grim. The silver light in his eyes was brighter now. Its power is fueled by fear. Your fear is making it stronger. But your power, the light inside you, is its antithesis. It is the only thing that can drive it away. My power. I don't know how to do anything. I can't even get through a workday without needing a 4-hour nap. Because it has been siphoning it from you. But it is still there. Your core is strong. Stronger than Lyra's was at your age, he held out his hand. I can't fight it for you, Elara. My power is of protection, of stone and shield. Yours is of light and life. You are the weapon here. But you are untrained. Let me be your guide. Let me anchor you. Take my hand. The choice must be yours. There it was. Agency. Consent. He wasn't commanding her or saving her in a way that made her helpless. He was offering a partnership. He was giving her the power to choose. She looked at his outstretched hand, then at the terrifying, shadowy form pressing against the window. The cold was seeping into her bones now, a familiar, draining chill. She could stay here, frozen in fear, and let it break through. Or she could trust the impossible man, who wore her great-great-grandmother's love and loss in his eyes. She could trust the spark of warmth she'd felt from his touch, the echo of recognition in her own blood. Fear was a prison. She had been living in it for 18 months. She was done being a prisoner. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Elara reached out and placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, the world exploded. It wasn't the gentle warmth from before. This was a supernova. A torrent of raw energy surged from him into her, a roaring river of power that filled all the empty, hollowed-out spaces inside her. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and more exhilarating than anything she had ever felt. It wasn't his power invading her, it was his power awakening hers, acting as a catalyst, a key turning in a lock she never knew existed. The burning light from her dreams erupted in her chest, not painful this time, but brilliant and fierce. It blazed down her arm, meeting his energy, twining with it, amplifying it. Focus. Alistair's voice cut through the roaring in her ears, a grounding anchor in the storm. Don't fight it. Shape it. See the shade, its cold, its emptiness. Your light is the answer. Push it out. Breathe. She squeezed her eyes shut, but the light was brighter behind her eyelids. She saw the shade not as a shadow, but as a void, a patch of utter nothingness that wanted to consume everything. And she saw her own power, a blazing, sun-gold star in her core. Following his mental touch, a gentle but firm pressure in her mind, she gathered the light, pulling it from her limbs, her heart, her very soul. It coalesced into a blinding sphere. The fear was still there, a trembling tremor beneath the power, but it was no longer in control. She was. Now, he commanded, his voice a resonant boom that vibrated through their joined hands. Elara opened her eyes and screamed, not in terror, but in a furious, defiant release. She thrust her free hand toward the window, and the golden light erupted from her, a concussive wave of pure energy and life. It struck the window with the force of a physical blow. The glass didn't shatter, it vaporized. The wave of light hit the shade head-on. The creature let out a soundless shriek that tore at the edges of reality. It was a scream of agony, of a creature of absolute darkness being exposed to a pure, undiluted sun. The shadow writhed, dissolving like smoke in a hurricane, its form disintegrating under the onslaught of her power. The oppressive cold vanished, replaced by a clean, warm heat. The unnatural fog outside was blasted away, revealing the rain-slicked street and the ordinary lights of the city, which now seemed impossibly bright and beautiful. The light receded, pulling back into her. The roaring in her ears subsided, leaving a profound silence. She was left standing, hand outstretched, panting for breath. Her entire body thrummed with a residual energy that made her feel more alive than she had in her entire life. The fatigue, the bone-deep ache, the mental fog, it was all gone. Wiped clean. Her legs finally gave out. Alistair was there before she could fall, his arm circling her waist, pulling her against his chest. He was solid, real, an unshakable mountain. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, utterly spent, but completely lucid. His hand was still holding hers, his thumb stroking gentle circles over her knuckles. "You did it," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. Awe? Pride? Relief? "We did it," she corrected, her voice muffled by his suit jacket. She lifted her head and looked at him. The silver light had faded from his eyes, leaving only the soft, stormy grey. The grief was still there, a shadow in their depths, but it was joined by something new. Something for her. The power imbalance that had defined their first meeting had been irrevocably altered. He had not saved a damsel, he had armed a warrior. He looked at her not as a fragile echo of a past love, but as an equal. A partner. The aftermath of the fight left the office in a state of charged tranquility. The vaporized window was a gaping hole to the night, letting in the clean, rain-washed air that smelled of wet asphalt and new beginnings. Elara stood on her own now, though the memory of Alistair's strength supporting her was a tangible warmth against her back. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a clear, thrumming awareness of her own body, of the quiet, steady hum of power that now resided in her veins. It wasn't a sickness. It was her. Alistair moved to the open window, staring out at the city lights. His broad shoulders were tense. "That was only a scout," he said, his voice low. "A probe. Now that it knows for certain what you are, its master will send more. He will not stop." "Who is he?" Elara asked, wrapping her arms around herself. The question was steady, devoid of the panic she would have felt an hour ago. "A rival. Another of my kind, but one who chose a different path," Alistair explained, turning back to face her. "He believes power like yours should be collected, controlled, caged. He tried to take Lyra, to bind her to him. She fought him, and in his rage, he sent the shade that ended her life. He has been in hiding for a century, but your awakening has drawn him out." He walked back to his desk and picked up the locket, holding it out to her. "Lyra trusted me to protect her, and I built her a beautiful, safe cage. I thought that was love. I kept her from her own power, told her it was too dangerous, that I would be her shield. I made her dependent on me. It was that dependency that left her vulnerable when I wasn't there." His confession was raw, a stripping away of his ancient pride. He was giving her the truth, a truth that cost him everything. "I will not make that mistake with you. What happened here tonight, this was your victory, Elara. Your strength. I was merely a conduit." He placed the locket in her palm and closed her fingers around it. The metal was warm. "The choice is yours. You can walk out that door, and I will spend the rest of my long life trying to protect you from the shadows. He will hunt you, and I will hunt him. Or," he paused, his grey eyes locking with hers, vulnerable and completely open for the first time, "you can stay. You can let me teach you how to control this gift. How to wield it. How to become the shield yourself. Not as my ward. Not as a replacement for what I lost. But as my partner." The word hung in the air between them. Partner. A word of equality, of respect, of a shared future. He was offering her a life she couldn't have imagined, fraught with danger, but also filled with a power and vitality she was only just beginning to taste. He was offering her the chance to be the hero of her own story. She looked down at the locket in her hand, at the face of the woman whose legacy she carried. Lyra had been denied her power, and it had cost her her life. Elara would not let her own story end the same way. She closed her hand, the engraved star pressing into her palm. She felt its echo on her wrist, a gentle, steady pulse. "Okay," she said, her voice clear and strong. She met his gaze, and for the first time, she did not feel small or sick or afraid in his presence. She felt his equal. "Okay, Alistair. Teach me." A slow smile spread across his face, and it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. It transformed his severe features, erasing the lines of grief and filling his eyes with a light she had not seen before. It was a light of hope. "Where do we begin?" she asked, a thrill of anticipation running through her, chasing away the last vestiges of fear. He gestured to the vast library of ancient books that lined the walls. "We begin with the truth," he said, his voice resonating with a new, vibrant energy. "Your truth. The story of your bloodline, and the power you were born to command." He pulled a heavy, leather-bound tome from a shelf, its cover embossed with the same sigil as her locket. He placed it on the desk between them, a bridge across the centuries. As Elara stepped forward, ready to begin, she knew her old life was over. The tired, sick woman who had walked into this office was gone, burned away in a blaze of golden light. In her place was someone new, someone with starlight in her veins and a future she would fight to claim, with an ancient guardian by her side. The rain had stopped. The storm had passed. And for the first time in a long, long time, Elara Hayes felt the promise of the dawn.